Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Strategic Solutions for Overcoming a Complex eBook Ecosystem, de Gruyter's University Press Library, which is sponsored by de Gruyter. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd just like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. Along the right-hand side, you may see a Q&A panel and a chat panel. If you don't, you can click the button that sort of looks like a dialog cloud on the bottom of your screen to open up that chat panel. And if you don't see the Q&A, the little three dots button will let you find that. Please use the Q&A panel to give questions for our speakers. We will take a little time at the end to address as many questions as we have time for, so please do send them in throughout. And the chat panel is how you let me know if you need any technical assistance. Please send me a message if you're having trouble with audio or video or anything like that, and I will troubleshoot that issue with you privately. Today, we're using the hashtag ACRLChoiceWebinars during this event, so if you have another screen handy, shout out to us. We're at choice_reviews on Twitter. Also note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive an email with a link to the archived version. All right. So as I mentioned, today's session is titled De Gruyter's University Press Library, Strategic Solutions for Overcoming a Complex University Press eBook Ecosystem. And our speakers today are David Solano. He's the Americas Sales Director for de Gruyter, and Anna Maria Ion. She's Partner Press Associate at de Gruyter, as well as Bill Molterich, who is the Head of Collection Development at New York University's Elmer H. Bobst Library. With that, I'd like to hand things over to David for a quick look at today's agenda.
Thank you, Mark. Also, big thanks to Choice as well as to everyone in the audience for joining us today. As Mark mentioned, I'm Dave Solano from de Gruyter, and I'll be kicking off this presentation. To help put the session into perspective, let's take a look at the agenda, which is broken down into the following 4 points. The flow of this session is part storytelling and part experience sharing via the first 3 parts: University Press eBook Ecosystem, Hypothesis, Experiment, and Results, and Sustainable Contribution to the UP eBook Ecosystem, and part interactive for everyone to participate in the form of a question and answer session. In terms of timing, please count on 45 minutes for the first 3 parts and 15 minutes for the Q&A. So if there aren't any pressing questions and if all is well with the audio and visual, let's get into this. University Press eBook Ecosystem. This is the first part. Throughout this session, we'll be using several keywords, acronyms, and phrases without definition, as the assumption is that many of you are already familiar. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have signed up. However, one keyword that we think deserves a little explanation is that of ecosystem, which is defined on your screen by Investopedia. A business ecosystem is the network of organizations, including suppliers, distributors, customers, competitors, government agencies, and so on, involved in the delivery of a specific product or service through both competition and cooperation. The idea is that each entity in the ecosystem affects and is affected by the others, creating a constantly evolving relationship in which each entity must be flexible and adaptable in order to survive, as in a biological ecosystem. So what is the University Press eBook business ecosystem? Or simply put, what is the University Press eBook ecosystem? Let's have a start by looking at the next slide. Not unlike the Investopedia definition on the prior slide, the University Press ebook ecosystem includes a network of suppliers, in other words, university presses, as you can see in the left-hand column, distributors under the hosting column, and customers, aka libraries, all the way on the right-hand side. As you can see by this graphic, there's also competition, especially when it comes to authorship, as well as distribution. At a first glance, a novice might describe this ecosystem as nothing special and maybe even simple. However, just like most biological and business ecosystems, the University Press ebook ecosystem is anything but. The complexity of this ecosystem is quite expansive and is made up of, as you can see here, varying types of presses through 4 tiers with their own unique mission statement. Multiple organizations and their platforms that host the UP content, as noted in the hosting column. Numerous business models and levels of digital rights management that differ from year to year, from press to press. And finally, many purchasing libraries ranging from research-intense ARLs to smaller prestigious baccalaureate institutions. Let's take a look how components of the ecosystem connect and interact with one another. Let's start with an example. The distribution landscape for a Group 2 press. These presses are heavily dependent on the utilization of hard and soft aggregators for revenue, with hard aggregators being the ones that use varying levels of DRM and soft aggregators being those with none. They also rely a lot on title-by-title purchases in models such as single-title sales and demand-driven acquisition. This final click illustrates that due to how content for Group 2 presses is made available to the marketplace, there's little acquisition difference between library types. So in other words, how an R1 collects content from a Group 2 press is the same as a baccalaureate. Complex and confusing, right? Now let's take a look at another example. This is an example from a Group 4 press. These are presses with greater than $6 million in annual revenue, the largest of any university presses. As you can see here, these presses have the same distribution landscape as Group 2 presses, but with one major twist. These presses have more commercial options because some of them own their own platform and microsites, which, keeping with the theme here, leads to more choices for libraries, more complexity. Let's flip the vantage point of the ecosystem to that of a master's library. Of course, it all depends on the institution and what their preferred acquisition pathway will be. However, as we could see here, there are numerous pathways to choose from, often leading to duplicate purchasing and not being able to purchase complete front lists from one particular platform. Taking one final look at the ecosystem, where we have presses, aka suppliers, distributors, customers, and competition, and no one simple pathway toward the purchase of complete university press frontlist content, we have quite the complex setting. It should be noted that the pathway illustrations on this slide come as a result of an advisory meeting that we held in Charleston this past fall. This meeting, which brought together librarians and university presses alike, was focused on better understanding each other's challenges. For example, libraries were worried about funding, whereas publishers were worried about sales and sustainability. One interesting statistic to share from the 23 participating libraries concerned the business models their respective libraries use for acquiring university press ebooks. More specifically, here were the results. Some surprising figures here, I have to say. Vast majority of the folks who participated stated that they were interested in purchasing this content, or their preference was to purchase in a number of different ways, actually, via single use, single title purchase, via collections, and via demand-driven models. And as a side note, and even more interesting, the collection model is quite flawed, as we'll see in the next slide. We could spend an entire afternoon and probably longer delving into the many components of the University Press ebook ecosystem. However, we're not allotted so much time during this session. So let's drill down into one of those components, the multi-use versus single-use component. In this graphic, you'll see 3 university presses, Harvard, Princeton, and Columbia University Press, and the number of titles from the recent front list that were made available to the marketplace, AKA the University Press ebook ecosystem that we've been speaking about, in single-use and multiple-use formats. As you can see from the far right-hand column, the percentage of multi-use titles for each press and front list year varies. For example, if we look at the press on top, we see that they made 61% of their front list available in the copyright years 2014 through 2015, 29% of their front list available in the copyright years 2016 through 2017, and 36% of their front list available in the copyright year 2018. Why is this? To put simply, university presses are heavily reliant on the sales of their print titles, especially those that become course-adopted titles. As a result, they restrict titles that they think are going to become course-adopted. In other words, for those titles that they feel will be sold in high quantities, university presses only allow the marketplace/ecosystem to purchase them in single-use electronic format along with print. And this percentage of the front list that is made available in single-use electronic versus multi-use electronic, AKA unlimited, from year to year and press to press. Another contribution to the complexity of the university press ebook ecosystem. As you probably could expect by what we've already presented and from the tone of the messaging here, there are a tremendous amount of pain points in this complex ecosystem. From a university press's perspective, one of the major pain points is fear of cannibalization of print, especially for particular print titles made available to the marketplace in multi-use electronic, and that contributes to low print sales of the title. However, presses continue to experiment with books, though some would say in inconsistent ways with varying successes and many pain points as outlined in this slide that you have in front of you. On the pain point side of things, publishers have seen inconsistent revenue streams from books, a very low cost per title via the subscription and aggregated collection models, and no guarantee of payment via demand-driven models. Combine this with a print side of the business that continues to move in the wrong direction, we have ourselves an unsustainable arrangement for presses, which puts what we know as the low-use scholarly monograph in jeopardy. And now for a library's perspective of this ecosystem.
Thanks, Dave. So this is Bill, and I thought it would be important to address sort of what were the frictions that New York University was experiencing that made us excited and interested and happy to join the Gruyter pilot. And a lot of the troubles we were having echoed things that Dave just mentioned. I would say a great many of them stem from all those arrows in those slides. So the multiple places where books were available, and the converse side of that, the many books that were not available in those places or across those places. And we felt that most intensely, I think, as we looked at course-assigned books from presses where we were trying to do comprehensive ebook collecting. And not only were there issues of titles that were not released as ebooks, there were issues of the need for unlimited ebooks that were owned by NYU as the type of book we could confidently tell faculty was available to be assigned in a course. And so DRM was also an issue. And so A lot of our struggle, I think, had to do with understanding which titles were available in which places, in which ways. That, of course, then led to difficulties with acquisitions, with overlap in offerings between business models and potential duplicative payments. It made it hard for our selectors to make informed decisions about format or about titles that we may have already owned. And then it made the work in technical services also difficult, given the multiple suppliers of metadata or purchase title lists and things of that nature. The other things we were really concerned about here were things I've categorized here as sustainability. So we recognized that the ecosystem for eBooks, university presses in particular, involved low-use books that we knew were important to our researchers, whether they were authors or consumers of that research. We wanted to consider how we supported that environment. We also wanted to have a sustainable economic model where we knew we could provide eBooks across our global university and to folks studying online. And we also wanted to have we were concerned, as so many people are, about cost containment and understanding and having predictability about the cost of purchasing the ebook. And so I think clearly we were struggling, and the university press books were particularly complicated for us. Give it back to you, Dan.
Thanks, Bill. We'll now be moving to the second part of our session, hypothesis, experiment, and results. A few years back, Gruyter, through an experience of our own with the University Press ebook ecosystem, developed an hypothesis that we were interested in testing out. More specifically, this hypothesis was as follows. If the complete ebook front list for a select group of university presses were to be made available in multi-use, aka unlimited electronic format, on one platform with no digital rights management to a select group of purchasing libraries, the stated pain points could be overcome in a manner that's sustainable for both participating university presses and libraries alike. In other words, at the time, we thought that there could be a sustainable balance or sweet spot, really, where university presses could continue to sell their print books while also simplifying the ecosystem by offering their complete front list in multi-use / unlimited electronic format on one platform with no digital rights management. To test out this hypothesis, we needed some subjects. So along with LYRASIS, as you'll see in the bottom of this graph here, we were able to gain participation commitment from 3 prestigious North American university presses. On the left-hand side, you'll see Harvard University Press, Princeton University Press, and Columbia University Press, and 10 libraries. Well, actually 14 libraries if you count, for example, we've got here Colby, Bates, and Bowdoin under one logo, which are all summarized on the right-hand side of this slide. You can see the diversity in the library types, which range from doctoral R1 and R2 according to Carnegie classification, down to baccalaureate institutions. As you could imagine, from some of the ecosystem slides that were presented earlier, this diversity was very important for our experiment. So what exactly was the setup of the experiment? In summary, 3 noted presses would make their complete front list available in multi-use electronic format with no DRM and perpetual rights on the Gruyter platform to the 14 participating and purchasing libraries. In an effort to mimic course adoption in an electronic environment, there was one twist on this business model: a multiplier that charged the respective school an additional price for a book that was used a certain amount of times during what we called a pilot. This threshold was calculated by taking the number of chapters in that particular book and multiplying that by 3.5. For example, if a book had 10 chapters, then the threshold would be 35. In other words, if that book got downloaded 35 times or more throughout the pilot, then that particular library would need to pay the lowest prevailing print price for an average book from that respective press. In addition to mimicking course adoption in an electronic environment, this multiplier was also designed as a safety net for the presses and if our hypothesis was incorrect. In other words, if the pilot model actually led to expedient print cannibalization, then at least those presses could make up for some of that lost revenue via this multiplier. The pilot was originally intended to run for 3 calendar years with 4 copyright years of content, with the 3 calendar years being 2015 through 2017, and the 4 copyright years of content being 2014 through 2017. However, there were a couple of things that happened along the way. Those things were, for one, the presses required a little bit more data, which required us to bring on board more schools, which we did. According to my last count at the end of 2019, we had about 35 libraries participating. And number 2, more presses outside of the original 3 that I showed on the prior slide were interested in joining the pilot, which we selectively allowed in, bringing the number of presses that participated in the pilot up to 8 throughout the year 2019. It should be noted that although we brought on board more libraries and presses and extended the pilot through the end of 2019, that the results from the pilot that are summarized in the following slides only account for the 3 original presses and 14 original purchasing libraries, /10. This is because we had many more years of consistent data for those presses and libraries versus, for example, another press that joined at the onset of the last calendar year of the pilot. So what were the results of this pilot? Drum roll, please. Here are the results. To summarize, let's start with the first bullet point, which isn't a terrible surprise. In other words, ebook usage continues to peak 2 years after publication. I say that this isn't a terrible surprise since there's already been lots written about usage of humanities and social sciences content and how it's highly used numbers of years after publication. To be honest, we wouldn't be surprised that if 3 years from now we continue to see the same usage of this content, it'll continue to peak. Nothing earth-shattering, however, a bit interesting when thinking about this future usage pattern alongside the usual workflow that university presses employ when it comes to restricting a title via single-use electronic before that title is even published. The second result of the pilot is that of high usage. More precisely, the second bullet point says the average library had 20+ downloads per title from 45% of the collection after 2 years. This usage was lauded by university presses and libraries alike, and especially so when considering we're not talking about bleeding-edge STM content, which is typically used at a high rate upon publication. Rather, this high usage was coming from titles known as low-use scholarly monographs, and whose usage continues to peak to this very day. The last few bullet points results hit home quite firmly for all that participated, as well as for us here at the Gruyter. More specifically, we found that usage and adoption rates are marginally the same for single-use titles and multi-use titles. When considering simple usage, although all titles in the pilot were made available in multi-use / unlimited electronic access, aka MUPO, we were still able to tell which ones were MUPO versus SUPO outside of the pilot. And upon comparing the usage from both groups, we were interested to find out that SUPO titles were only 10% more likely to be used than MUPO titles. So why is this interesting? Well, let's think about this from the perspective of why presses designate titles MUPO versus SUPO to begin with. Because they feel that titles that are SUPO will become course adopted, and they don't want to cannibalize the print business potential of those titles by offering them via MUPO. You have to wonder, if this process were a bit more precise, wouldn't the usage from SUPO titles be much higher than just 10% versus MUPO? Just a personal thought from me. The last result emphasized just how unique each library really is. This learning was that 74% of the unique titles adopted are unique to each library. Remember that an adoption was that a particular title was used 3 times the number of chapters in that book. In other words, a title that was used at a high rate and quite possibly was a course adopted title. However, in taking a look at the results, it was clear that just because a title is course adopted or used at a high rate at a certain library doesn't mean that that particular title will be course adopted or used at a high rate at another library. This brings us to our summary statement from the pilot, which I promise you this will be the last slide I'll be reading word for word. That summary statement is as follows. Consistent behavior of the usage patterns from copyright years 2014 through 2016 during the calendar years 2015 through 2018, combined with the lack of significant differentiation between a pilot-only title and a multi-use title over the same period, provides evidence to the fact that the selection of rights at the title level by a university press, as a general rule, diminishes the perceived value of multi-use title and overcompensates for the perceived value of a pilot-only title in a digital environment. Needless to say, our experience at the Gruyter with this pilot was quite impactful and helped determine the next steps, which I'll be summarizing in the next section of this presentation, the one before the Q&A. However, before we get to that, some insight from the participating university presses and from Bill at NYU. First, university press pilot experience. On the university press side of things, all of the pain points that I referenced early in this presentation were addressed. There were, as a result of the pilot, no evidence of print cannibalization, huge fear and pain point on the university press side of things. This business model served as a sustainable and new revenue stream for the presses that participated. And of course, as a result of this pilot, the libraries showed fantastic support for the presses and their ever so important low-use scholarly monographs. In addition, the multiplier that was used to mimic course adoption certainly provided nice insight, especially on the publishing side of things. And now for a library's perspective. Bill?
Thanks again. So I think one of the takeaways we had was something that Dave just mentioned and was interesting and we had suspected, but the idea that course book assignments are idiosyncratic institution to institution, that nobody was that fantastic at predicting which books were going to be the high-use books in these broad collections. The other thing, though, I think that's worth mentioning is that for us, when we looked at the pilot, there was never a question about the value of the content, in that even if we expected it sort of generally to be low use, it was high-value content, and it was a world of publishing, the university press publishing world, that we wanted to support, I mean, as players in that and participants in that world. So the real considerations for us were about sustainability in the terms of affordability, but also, and this was the real learning opportunity in the pilot, also in terms of sustainable workflows. And that meant being able to, in the end, incorporate the pilot purchasing in our general book and ebook workflow. So that had a lot to do with list management, understanding what we purchased versus what we purchased in what format versus what was active, what we had cataloged, what was on in discovery systems. So that was one aspect of the sustainability that through practice and working in partnership with the Gruyter and the publishers, we were able to get through. The other thing I think is because we didn't, assessment became not an issue, but a part of our learning in the pilot, especially because beyond our counter statistics, usage statistics weren't the primary driver. We didn't expect them to be the primary indicator of the value. That meant that sort of questions about fulfillment and accuracy of the content, questions about how things worked in our systems, how we managed exceptions, those became important. And we found ourselves, I'm not certain we know the complete answers yet, wondering how else do you measure, what are the other important criteria, measurable criteria for assessing a project like this. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. And finally, third section, sustainable contribution to the University Press ebook ecosystem. A few slides back, I mentioned how this pilot helped the Gruyter and the participating university presses determine some impactful next steps, actually along with the university libraries. To put it simply, those next steps are to bring the pilot business model to more libraries and presses, which is what we launched at this past fall's Charleston conference. The business model does have a few slight revisions versus what you saw earlier in the presentation, but I'll detail those in one of the upcoming slides. The branding is under the Gruyter's University Press Library, or UPL, and is represented by Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom, amongst other really cool things. We thought that this representation was a perfect match as imparting wisdom to as many libraries as possible, all in multi-use electronic/unlimited format with no DRM and on one platform is the main motivation behind this offering. You'll also notice that Athena is a bit red/crimson, which is an homage to Harvard University Press, who was the first press that we at the Gruyter worked with. Based on the results from the pilot and the pain points that the presses and libraries that participated noted, we feel strongly that this way forward is unique and one that is sustainable, not only for the presses that are involved, but also for purchasing libraries. In addition to the three presses that I described earlier, Harvard, Princeton, and Columbia, the Gruyter's University Press Library now has 12 prestigious North American presses. Now, 12 if you count New York University Press and Fordham University Press together as one. Those presses that are new to the program for 2020 are starred here in this slide and include Stanford University Press, NYU/Fordham University Press, Yale University Press, and the University of Chicago Press. Let's not also forget about those presses that joined the pilot midstream, including Cornell University Press, the University of Toronto Press, University of Pennsylvania Press, University of California Press, and Rutgers University Press. With the launch of our new platform next month, each of these presses will be represented by a microsite of their own, which will include specific press branding and host their content as if it's a website of their own. This is a major next step towards supporting university presses and providing them with what we call individualized representation at the Gruyter. Before I move to the business model, as I promised in the last slide, I just wanted to emphasize that not only is there prestige represented in this list of presses, but we at the Gruyter take a tremendous amount of pride in having identified the inefficiencies in the marketplace and being able to provide the sustainable solution to those that are in the ecosystem. On the press side of things, you can imagine how such a solution comes as a major welcome, especially in light of recent press closures and struggles that were made known publicly. Finally, from my end of things, at least before the question and answer session, the outline of our business model. Most of the points noted here were already summarized earlier in the presentation. However, there are also some updates. First, the presses that have joined this model since the inception of the pilot are now represented in the MUPO versus SUPO illustration, as you can see up above. And just like the original, you'll see that the content that's made available via our University Press library model, the one on the right-hand side, in MUPO versus anywhere else is much higher. Second, you won't see the adoption multiplier as it has been eliminated from the official business model. Although we'll certainly continue to monitor usage and use it to help dictate possible future upgrades to the model, we decided that making the model even more simple is the best way forward. Therefore, our University Press library business model is truly a one-time purchase with no DRM and multi-use unlimited format on one platform with specific press microsites. A simple and sustainable model for libraries and a simple and sustainable model for those presses that participate. Finally, as a means of being able to scale this model to more institution types, we've developed a pricing scheme that will provide more discounts to participants, including discounts to scale up depending on the number of presses purchased, and small school discounts geared toward affordability at those institutions. Lastly, we are now open to consortia arrangements now that we've moved out of our pilot mode into official business model, and have actually just recently signed an arrangement with a major North American consortium. In the next slide, Anna will be talking about the service standards that set our University Press library apart from the pack and truly gives libraries the ability to get it and forget it and focus on other things when it comes to the university ebook acquisition ecosystem. Anna?
Thanks, Dave. I'm going to switch gears here a little and just talk about our service standards, which my colleagues and I have spent quite some time defining and just really owning as a team. So when the UPL was still in its pilot phase, as we learned earlier, we received a lot of feedback and suggestions from a committee of dedicated and invested librarians. Now, these were institutions who were in the pilot from the beginning, and much of this feedback, with the help of Bill as well. And together, we discussed and we collaborated and came up with a set of standards that would create accountability and measurable results. Now, the idea behind these standards is that in setting the bar high for ourselves and taking care of all the services offered, you can just be a little more carefree after investing in the UPL. And here, I've listed a number of the standards that we're really tackling and that mean a lot to us right now. So the first one, know in advance when titles will be uploaded to our platform. So what does this mean? Essentially, we provide you with a content delivery schedule according to the pub date, so you know exactly what to expect. Next, timely delivery of discovery tools. This includes enhanced MARC records, KBART files, all of which are provided on a monthly basis, and of course, uploads into discovery services vendors such as the ones listed below. Now, and we also work closely with these vendors, and our job is to represent you as librarians. So if in-tota targets need to be updated, if we need to update the knowledge base, it is our job to help represent you in such a way. Next, we have title list management. Now, this is something that I've been directly involved in for a few years now, and it took some time, and we determined what it took to make this, to make this right. What is it exactly that librarians are looking for? And we came up with some lists here, which is front list by copyright year provided months before publication. This is something librarians, of course, want to see. In addition to this, we have exclusions list, print only. So what is excluded from digital distribution also needs to be made available to librarians as soon as possible. And thirdly, quality control provided to ensure completeness in advance of publication. Next, we have a dedicated customer service, which is only growing. So we are here to answer any questions if they have anything to do with either the service standards you see here or our content or specific presses or collections you may be interested in hearing about. We are here, and we would love to hear from you. Customer service continues long after, the last title is made available, the last MARC record is uploaded. We are here long after that and are here to represent the UPL. And finally, we have microsites here. Dave just briefly mentioned this on the last slide, but we expect this to be rolled out March 2020 and are really looking forward to having what he described as individualized representation for our presses. And sorry, I lost my train of thought. But here you will be able to view each UPL page and see their titles, see what you have access to. And we just expect that this will be a great addition to the UPL and are really looking forward to it. And just to emphasize, all of these points listed here, they all focus on individualized representation for our standards. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bill. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Anna. And I just want to second the notion that having these explicit service standards is, I think, really important because given the complexity of the environment, I don't know that everything generally always runs on rails, right? But I think having explicit goals that everyone can share is the key first step in that. The other thing is I want to say that, the invigorating part about this pilot and this new model has been seeing the willingness and ability of libraries, of presses, and to Gruyter vendors to experiment. And so sort of in the spirit of enough is never enough, I've compiled just some of the things that I think NYU has been trying to pursue, some of our wish list of further experimentation. And one I think Dave mentioned is consortial offers. We're particularly interested in ways to harness purchases by larger institutions to expand access to institutions in consortial relationships with us or others in ways that they couldn't afford otherwise. So some sort of a consortial arrangement where there's a sum based on what the large members of the consortium or the big spenders or the people buying more books in the consortium are doing to spread that access further. The mention, I think, of course, we wish there were no exceptions. I think we've made strides to managing exceptions to the publisher output in E, and some of the data that Dave pointed to may make that even easier to pursue further. We're really interested in ILL rights for full eBooks. I think that in my mind, we're trying to separate licensing the right and then the technical capabilities to loan those books. There are some ways to do that now, so that's an important thing. I also think that the connection between our ebook purchasing and print is something that we want to make closer in these sorts of arrangements, whether through the idea of deeply discounted print associated with ebooks we buy, or the ability to do some sort of print on demand. And finally, we've been looking closely at, along with some partners, including like Columbia and others, at the Simply e-reader, and how might we be able to use something like OPDS feeds or other sort of programmatic access to ebooks and metadata to incorporate content in our workflows and in unique readers in ways we aren't able to right now. So that's sort of some further steps or some new ideas or some wish list items that I think we have here. So thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you, Bill, very much. And thank you, everyone, for joining. As promised, that's the storytelling portion of this session. We'll be moving on to the question and answer portion. And I believe, Mark, this is a part of our session that will be coordinated by you. So I'll hand the mic over.
All right. Thank you, David. This is Mark Dirks from ACRL and Choice. We have some time here, it looks like, right at the end for a few questions. So I would encourage folks, if you do have questions for either David or Bill or Anna, please drop those into the Q&A module, and we will get to as many as we have time for. All right, so we've got a few in the hopper already. We had a question that came in a little while ago from Martha, who asked, how will this work with the university presses that are in JSTOR eBooks? And David, would you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Sure. Well, in one of the earlier slides here, I'm just going to scroll back. There are a number of presses that are on JSTOR, provide their content on JSTOR that we also partner up with. For those presses, we will be providing their complete front lists via the Gruyter platform. In one of the other prior slides, you'll see right here, actually, that although we are moving from an ecosystem where there is a lot of content that's not available in multi-use to an ecosystem where the vast majority of the content is available in multi-use on the Gruyter platform, thought that I would say that there are actually three very small exceptions here. The first exception, and those exceptions are for University of Toronto Press, Princeton University Press, and the University of Chicago Press, with around a dozen or less titles from each of those presses, two of which have got huge front lists, not a part of this model. However, again, it is certainly a huge difference between what is made available on any other platform that's out there. One more thing that I will say here is that at the Gruyter, we always say that a duplicate revenue stream is not something that we want to involve ourselves in. So if you are a school that may have purchased some of the university press content from one of the presses that's on JSTOR in multi-use electronic format, and if you are interested in a collection with us, we're not going to charge you twice for that collection. We'll ask you which titles that you have, and then we will discount that collection so that you are not charged twice. But we will also provide dual access to those particular titles on the Gruyter platform. I hope that answers your question.
Great. Yeah, I think that does. Let me look through our questions here. And see what else we've got. All right. So we've got here a question for David, it looks like. What are the requirements if we've already subscribed to a previous model, but you wish to purchase this now? And this may relate to what you were just talking about, but we'll see if that's the case. Are libraries subject to duplicate fees? It sounds to me, based on what you just said, that no, they're not.
Yeah, that is correct. It's a very similar question, and again, there is some content that is available on our platform that is available elsewhere. However, what to keep in mind here is that we are offering a lot more that's not available elsewhere in multi-use electronic, and we're also not charging twice for what you may have purchased elsewhere. So we've got a team on our end that is really good at analyzing title lists and what may have been purchased, and we'll be able to work out a price that would only charge for the content that was not purchased elsewhere.
Great. So this question notes that you mentioned earlier that there are discounts for small schools. What do those look like? Can you talk about how much of a discount there is there, or
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, so throughout the pilot, we started with 3 university presses. So it was quite simple, so to speak, to create the pricing for the libraries that participated. We typically had one price for a library, with the exception being those smaller schools that came on board as one. We treated them as one institution. However, now that we've moved from pilot to official business model, we've got a few more transparent discounts that come into play. So those transparent discounts are as follows. Number 1, we have overall collection discounts, knowing fully well that complete front list collections aren't for everyone. They're certainly for many libraries, but they're not for everyone. So as a result, we apply collection discounts just in case we're able to, move those libraries to say, hey, look, complete front lists aren't for us, but we might be able to do it at a really good price, and hopefully have convinced some folks to convince them to go in that direction. On top of the collection discounts, we offer multi-press purchases. So if a library were to purchase the front list from 5 presses, there's an additional discount, et cetera, et cetera. And then we've got discounting that's based on Carnegie classification. And that Carnegie classification discounting ranges from just a smaller discount for some of the smaller ARLs, going down to a much more substantial discount for baccalaureate institutions and special schools and community colleges.
All right. Great. Let me see what we've got here. And thanks to everyone for putting the questions in. It takes just a second for me to process them. Let's see. So we have a question here from Simon, and Simon asks, is there a plan to incorporate University Press Journal content into the platform, or will the platform be exclusively for book content?
That's a really good question. We don't like to say never, when it comes to things such as this. However, there are a few things that we are focusing on scaling at the present moment, and those things include providing more support for the university presses, because after all, this is what this is all, at least partially about. In addition to helping simplify libraries' lives, it's to support the low-use scholarly monograph, and we've promised these presses that we will build upon our prior successes. So we'd like to scale and bring on board more libraries that can support this business model, and thus support the ever so important university presses and low-use scholarly monographs. And in addition to that, we are thinking more about how this model can scale to other press types. Perhaps some smaller presses in addition to the tier 3 and the tier 4 presses. It's not to say journals won't be a thing that we won't be looking at in the future. It's just we've got some immediate things that we're working on right now, but we'll certainly keep an open mind, and nothing is off the table, to be honest, moving forward, so long as it's something that helps the university presses and solves a challenge or a pain point on the library side of things.
Okay, great. I mean, that sounds like maybe the sort of answer you would expect, that, yeah, we're keeping our minds open, that our plans are not entirely set. Absolutely. Let's see. So let's see. We've got a question here. Let me put this to Anna. Michelle asks, is the metadata that's applied uniform in quality and completeness across the participating presses? Would you mind speaking to that for a bit, Anna?
Hi, that's a great question. Yeah, it is. We have certain metadata standards that presses need to abide by when they send this over to us. Of course, there are special cases, but generally speaking, we do work with a uniform set of metadata that comes directly from the presses.
Great.
Does that answer your question?
I think it does. Yeah. I mean, there's a certain minimum, that absolutely must be met.
Yeah, we have certain requirements that
Yep.
have to be met and sent in certain formats, such as Onyx, XML.
Great. We've got I think a pretty straightforward question here for you, David, and that is, how do you define the front list for these presses? And maybe I'll add on to that. Is it uniform across all of the presses, or does each press have sort of its own considerations of what the front list is, and how do those match up with how de Gruyter thinks of front list and defines it?
I think that's a really good question. So to help answer that question, we have to think about these university presses and how they publish their content. And they publish their content in seasons. These seasons are often in a fall season and then in a print season. At de Gruyter, what we've done is that we've taken the books from these seasons and have created copyright years out of them. And if we take a look at the past 5 years of these copyright years that we've put together for the presses that we've worked with, and also consider how consistent presses usually are with their output, the number of titles per copyright year, or these front list collection chunks, pretty consistent from year to year. And in some presses cases, you could almost set your watch to the number of titles that are going to be coming out in next year and the following year for a specific press. We define front list as current year. So this year, the front list is copyright year 2020. But I'm sure that in this presentation here, I may have used the term front list to apply to any year going back to the year 2014. And that's the year when we embarked on this pilot along with the presses and the schools. So if I were to summarize the categorization here, contemporary front list years are 2014 through 2019, and then current year or current front list is the current year 2020.
Great, thank you. All right, let's look. And we have a question here from Kathy that asks simply, we have not simply really, but we currently have a pretty large number of titles from Harvard. Can we move to having all of Harvard's ebook content in this model? And would there be a discount? And I want to throw that to David, but I also would ask Bill, in working in this model, do you have any experience with that, with working with, sort of the existing collection, and what has that been like?
Sure. Yeah, no, I'll happily answer that. And I mean, NYU buys a lot of ebooks. And so when we started to look at these pilot presses, that complicated environment was really a part of what we were dealing with. We had purchased titles from these presses through numerous channels, right? And very much, as Dave has been saying, the process involved de Gruyter doing some matching with the titles that we purchased and acknowledgement of that payment when it came time to talk about what things cost. So yeah, it was a relatively compared to other things, painless process.
Yeah, Mark, the only thing that I could say there is that it's in line with what I answered in the first two questions, and that is, we have a model here where we're providing the most titles in multi-use for the most presses on one platform with no DRM, and a big part of what we're doing here is in the spirit of helping these presses and supporting the low-use scholarly monographs. So if there are folks that are on the line who have a current method of purchasing and don't want to buy the same thing twice, hopefully my email address will be distributed after this session here. Feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to speak with you further.
Great. All right. Well, we are coming to the end of our time today, so I'll keep my eyes out for any last questions there as they come through. And before we sign off, I would just give folks a last second there to finish filling in that poll. So if you hadn't noticed it until now, we do have a final couple of poll questions that will come to you. All right, if you took a moment there just to give us a quick response to that poll, we'd appreciate it. All right. So I will say right now, thank you so much, David, and thank you, Anna and Bill, for your time today. And really, I think this is an excellent presentation. There's a lot of information there and a lot of cool stuff I think that you folks are doing in investigating the business models and coming to new ways of doing things. It's excellent. I would like to remind everybody out there that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for that follow-up email from ACRL and Choice with a link to the recording. And also, you should see a quick survey that will pop up in your chat box. If you could take a minute to fill that out here after the webinar and let us know how we did today, we would really appreciate that. All right. So thank you to everyone out there for joining us today. I hope that you enjoyed today's session, and I hope the rest of your day is great. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, everybody.